Hello and welcome to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu edition of The Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and today you'll learn some of the 32 principles of Jiu-Jitsu and how you can harness their power to succeed in business, relationships, life, and you guessed it, leadership storytelling. All that coming to you from a member of the legendary Gracie family that brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the world. I've often thought that storytelling is the jiu-jitsu of business communications because when done well, you can persuade even the most adversarial audiences and win them over to your way of thinking and doing. But if you roll into these kinds of awkward and difficult conversations with a zero-sum, winner-take-all mindset through the brute force of your intellect and voraciousness of your argument, well, you'll take a pounding. After reading Rener Gracie's new book, The 32 Principles, Harness the Power of Jiu-Jitsu to Succeed in Business, Relationships, and Life, that he co-wrote with Paul Volpani, I realized that every one of these principles can be applied to your approach to persuasive and influential leadership storytelling. You can roll with my 32 principles of effective jiu-jitsu storytelling, inspired by Rener's insights, in a blog I just shared on businessofstory.com. The link is in the show notes. Given that I've never actually taken jiu-jitsu or hit the mat, I invited our son and fellow storyteller, Parker Howell, to co-host with me today. Parker is a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and, like me, was excited to meet today's guest from the legendary Gracie family, Rener Gracie.
And it was my biggest fear in writing this book is like, man, what if we write a book and it's text on paper, but they don't get that same visual experience that all of these audience members are so happy to get when I do these visual presentations. And sometimes I have them out of their chairs and they're actually grabbing each other, and I'm having them actually do I did Procter & Gamble a month or two ago, and I was at Procter & Gamble headquarters teaching a group of like 50 executives, newly promoted leaders, and I had all of them on top of each other doing techniques. So not only were they learning the principles of jiu-jitsu applied to leadership and business, they were actually bonding with each other. So that's a little plug there for the Rener Gracie interactive keynotes. But the point is, what readers will get when they scan the QR code is a beautiful video that articulates the distance principle. Now, what does this one mean? In a fight, whoever manages the distance manages the damage that can be done.
Rener is co-owner and head instructor at the Gracie University of Jiu-Jitsu, headquartered in Torrance, California. He is known for his initiatives training police officers in jiu-jitsu-based self-defense and his advocacy calling for a nationwide police reform. His Gracie Survival Tactics curriculum is the first to be recognized in California as approved for law enforcement. He's an inventor and an entrepreneur, and he founded Quick Flip, a garment converting into a backpack, which was featured on ABC's Shark Tank and named as one of Time Magazine's 2019 Best Inventions. Today, you'll learn why Rener wrote his new book and how the 32 principles he identified are our brain's basic operating system for problem solving and success. Rener will share several of these principles demonstrating how they work in a jiu-jitsu contest and in life. And then by extension, I will show you how those principles can strengthen your leadership storytelling to build relationships with your colleagues and ultimately stronger teams. All that and more on this special edition of The Business of Story, co-hosted by Parker Howell in conversation with Rener Gracie. Rener, welcome to the show.
What a pleasure, man. Congrats on all the great work you're doing. Honored to be here.
I'm not a jiu-jitsu guy, and later in the show, I'm going to ask you, is a 62-year-old dude like me too old to start learning it? But I first learned about your family from a son-in-law of ours who introduced me to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and UFC, and I wasn't watching or any of that stuff. And Casey took me through a lot of the background and whatever. And then our son Parker got into jiu-jitsu, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, is now a purple belt. And so when we got the note that you were, interested in coming on the show, I shot Parker a note. I said, dude, you've got to come on and help me with the interview on this because you know the Gracie family and Brazilian jiu-jitsu a lot better than I do. So thank you. Welcome to the show. And first, Rener, let's go ahead. If you could just give a quick little backstory on your family and how you find yourself, what you're doing today with Gracie University.
Sure, that would be my pleasure. And, much like yourself, Park, we have to assume that many of your listeners and watchers, they have no knowledge really of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, maybe nothing beyond what they've heard maybe in the media, or the fact that Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk want to fight because Mark Zuckerberg is now doing Jiu-Jitsu. So maybe that's the extent of their exposure to it. Well, I'm a member of the Gracie family, widely known for creating the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It dates back to the early 1900s. My grandfather and his brother Carlos learned Japanese Jiu-Jitsu as young men. The challenge was that some of those techniques required heavily on strength, physicality, and power and explosiveness that these young men didn't possess. So it's the adaptations to those Japanese predecessor techniques that really gave birth to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And really what it was increasing the leverage, increasing the efficiency, increasing the timing, the patience, really changing the mindset and the philosophy of the application of those techniques. That's what gave birth to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu initially in Brazil. My grandfather was using these techniques to engage in challenge matches against other representatives from other martial arts disciplines to prove the efficacy of our Jiu-Jitsu. My father and my uncles were born into that legacy of family and fighting and challenge matches and really testing the effectiveness of these techniques. And then my father brought the art to America in 1978. My uncles soon followed, and he began teaching classes out of his garage. Everyone he met, he invited for a free class in his garage, saying, "Hey, nice to meet you. You sell water beds? Great. Come on over. I want to teach you a free class." So then he would basically invite these people, and then those people would tell their friends. And every time they told a friend, the friend got a free class, and the referring party got another free class. So everyone told everyone that they knew. Before you know it, the garage was overflowing with students in 1989. I think they had like 130 students on a waiting list to get into the garage to learn from my father and my uncles. They were only doing one-on-one private classes. And that's when they opened the first Gracie Academy here in Torrance, California. And that was 1989. So shoot, over 30 years ago now, and things have just grown ever since. In 1993 is when my father co-created the UFC. And most people don't know this, but the UFC in the original, first, second, third, fourth installment, really, it was just a big test of different martial arts disciplines against one another. Today, every MMA fighter does all the disciplines, right? You do wrestling, you do kickboxing, you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Back then, it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu against wrestling, against kickboxing, against sumo, against judo. So it was a true, pure comparison of styles. And the objective was very clear. The Gracie family, we knew that our Jiu-Jitsu was superior in terms of enabling a smaller person to defeat a larger opponent. And we had been testing it for the last 75, 80 years at the time, but the world did not know this. So the idea to put this on television so that spectators and potential students around the world could watch and see Jiu-Jitsu against karate or wrestling against judo, and then they could be the judge as to if I'm going to learn a martial art, if I'm going to learn any martial art, which one should it be? And that Ultimate Fighting Championship was designed to give students around the world, prospective students, that education, that insight, without them having to risk decades of study to a particular art before finding out that art may not get the results they're looking for. Let the experts battle it out. Thankfully, my uncle Hoyce, who was the representative chosen from our family, who was not a very imposing character, 6'1", 178 pounds, kind of a skinny Brazilian guy, great heart, great technique, went in there and he defeated giants to become the champion for 3 out of the first 4 Ultimate Fighting Championships. So instantly, you have this little skinny Brazilian guy defeating giants, and the world is put on notice. Everyone is shocked. No one can believe it. Military, U.S. Army Rangers, Special Forces, Navy SEALs, FBI, Secret Service, all these military and law enforcement branches see this and immediately start recruiting our family to begin revamping their hand-to-hand combat programs. So Jiu-Jitsu just kind of stormed onto the scene, and that was now 30 years ago. The UFC won November 12th, 1993. So here we are 30 years later, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is just taking over the adoption of this art by people from every socioeconomic class in every country of every age, men, women. I mean, it's just been a crazy ride to see how much it's grown since then. And Joe Rogan says it best. The reason why Jiu-Jitsu has taken the world by storm the way it has is because really it's the first martial art that delivers what it promises, in that a smaller, less athletic person can learn a small amount of Jiu-Jitsu and in very little time be capable of standing up to and defending against a much larger, more athletic, more aggressive, physical, violent threat. And the ability to give someone that confidence and that capability to neutralize that type of threat in so little time It's unique to jiu-jitsu, and which is why I couldn't be more grateful to have been born in this family and to have learned this skill from day one growing up. I mean, I'm not born on the mats. That would be a little creepy, but I'm learning to walk on the mats, and I'm learning, if as soon as I can remember, I'm learning jiu-jitsu techniques. And I grew up with this confidence and these skill sets to be able to basically take a stand and assert myself and to communicate confidently. And when there were bullies, which there were, be able to set boundaries and put an end to it, right? Every kid gets bullied. The only difference is some know how to stop it and others just become victims for the rest of their lives into adulthood. So I just feel so privileged to be part of this family and the work that we're now doing with law enforcement all over the country, teaching them nonviolent techniques to control and de-escalate physical altercations at a time where so many officers are escalating and using unnecessary levels of force in the field. Jiu-Jitsu is at the center of the discussion about the future of law enforcement tactics in America. So all by way of saying, it's just been an incredible ride, and Jiu-Jitsu has arrived, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it with you guys.
Right on.
That's awesome. Hey, I have a little question about some family history while you're here, Rener. UFC 1, Hoist Gracie. Is it true that you guys were so confident, the Gracie family was so confident in jiu-jitsu that they picked the smaller brother over Rickson Gracie to put him in because they just thought it would be more spectacular for the world to see?
Great question. So I wasn't in the room when the decision was made on who they're going to choose for the UFC. And everyone has their different stories, even within the family, of why they choose what. My father has been pretty outspoken about the fact that choosing Hoist, amongst other things, but choosing Hoist as the family representative was a great display of the fact that it was a smaller, weaker individual against the larger other opponents in the tournament. So speaking to kind of what you're saying now, that was his idea. There's also a very strong relationship between Hoist and my father in the garage days, because Hoist had come to the garage days very early from Brazil and had spent years training alongside my father as a young man. Like, I think he left Brazil at 17 or 18 years old. So Hoist was very young when he came here to live with my father and teach out of the garage. And they kind of grew together there. And then when the UFC came up, in addition to being a smaller member of the family, Hoist and my dad had a very strong relationship. So I think that played a little bit of part. But all by way of saying, Rickson, who many people thought should have been the obvious choice for the member of the family that should go in there and do his business. Rickson's a very imposing figure, right? Physically, very athletic, very strong. And you look at him and you feel sorry for the other guy, no matter who it is. But when you look at Hoist, you look at him and you feel sorry for Hoist, no matter who the other guy is. And it worked out. It worked out perfectly. The world saw what happened. And we don't know what would have happened if Rickson was the representative in those early UFCs. He would have won, no doubt. But we don't know what the effect would have been if it would have rattled the Western martial arts cage as violently as Hoist did. Bad example. It wasn't violent at all. It was actually very non-violent how he defeated these giants, but it wouldn't have been as an effective kind of shock to the martial arts community worldwide if he was so imposing. It would have been more of an expected outcome versus what we got.
Absolutely. And like you said, it wasn't violent to the point of one of his first opponents, he mounted him and the guy gave up because he was so frustrated, And
that's the beauty of jiu-jitsu, right? It's just something jiu-jitsu translates literally to gentleness art in Japanese, right? So that's the idea, is that jiu-jitsu gives you the ability to overcome violence with calmness and with gentility, right? To fight fire with water. And that's what's so remarkable, you guys. And in terms of why is jiu-jitsu growing so fast today, right? Mark Zuckerberg is an avid jiu-jitsu practitioner, right? And I don't know when this podcast is going to air, but there's a lot of conversation right now about him fighting Elon Musk because Mark is on this jiu-jitsu hype, which is awesome. He's very excited about it. I'm very excited that Mark is doing jiu-jitsu and he's wanting to put it to the test. So the point is, the world is falling in love with jiu-jitsu. And I think there's 3 solid reasons. Number 1, because it works. Number 2, because it allows the practitioner to overcome adversity and neutralize an aggressor without hurting the person. And that's pretty unique, right? If you think of boxing type, kickboxing, Muay Thai, karate, Kung Fu, Taekwondo, all the traditional arts that we think of when we think of fighting, right? Especially the ones that are popularized in the movies, which is where a lot of people get these ideas from, the Karate Kid, this, that, and the other. When you see that, you think of, if you hit me or offend me, I'm going to hit you harder so that you can't hit me a third time, right? Like you can't return fire after that. So it's really an all or nothing. There's not a lot of volume control when it comes to throwing a punch in someone's nose. So jiu-jitsu, however, provides the user with essentially what we call the violence scalability factor. The user can choose, do I want to just de-escalate, hold you, and essentially put out the fire with a blanket and just smother you, and then wait till I get that verbal compliance without ever throwing a single strike? Or is this a life or death situation where I need to resort to a submission hold that ultimately causes you to lose your life? Death by strangulation, deadly force. I have both abilities, but guess what I love the most? That I have the choice, and I don't have an art at my disposal that if I use my self-defense skills, now I might have won the battle, but I lose the war when I get sued for using excessive force in the eyes of a jury somewhere. With jiu-jitsu, that's not going to happen because I'm always only going to use the level of force necessary to neutralize the threat and no more, which is why obviously this is so massive for law enforcement. But I think human beings, like adult men and women like yourselves and myself, we love the idea of engaging in a physical altercation if we have to, and knowing that we don't have to impair the person permanently, incapacitate them for the rest of their life, rip their eyes out, right? We know of the martial arts where it's growing eyes, throat, rip his throat out, reach inside his chest and pull out his beating heart. And I'm like, hold on, bro. I don't know if I want to take the guy's heart out every single time. I might not want to kill the person. I might just want to neutralize, because let's be honest, when a fight happens, let's be honest, what are the reasons why? When men fight, now, maybe if it's a sexual assault, it's a different story, right? A woman's being targeted or an abduction attempt. But generally, 98% of the fights that happen, particularly between men, what are they a result of? Two things: ego and alcohol. Someone gets frustrated because you cut them off in traffic, or you cut them in line, or you walk by and your shoulders happen to bump and someone puffs up, or they're drunk and they're just acting a fool. In both cases, let me ask you, whether it was the ego that caused the rise of combative energy or whether it was the alcohol, my question to you is, does the other person deserve to die? If you were to assess the altercation 2 days later and really judge yourself critically for your performance and the outcome, and you ask yourself, man, should I have killed the guy based on the reason why we ended up fighting physically? In almost every case, the answer is no, unless he was trying to stab people with a knife and you strangle him, take the knife, and then stab him because it was life or death. Normally, it's not the case. So this is my point. Mature, humane, civil, respectful human beings love the violent scalability factor and the inherent gentle nature of jiu-jitsu, because we can be protective of our people, we can set boundaries, we can assert ourselves and live a healthy life without having to hurt other people at the same time, right? So 100%. Those are two, I think, of the biggest benefits I think people love about jiu-jitsu.
100%. And like what you're saying about law enforcement, I see that so clearly. A couple of years ago, Andrew Tang was coming out. He was saying every police officer in America should be a purple belt. Let's start there. When you bring in these police officers, what's the first kind of aha moment they're having when they're working with you and they're seeing the possibilities?
Yeah, I think that what the police officers don't recognize is how little time it takes to develop such an unfair advantage over the average untrained civilian or suspect that they would be interacting with. They all think it's going to be train for 5 years, 10 years, get a black belt, and then maybe I'll be proficient. The reality is we're talking like 40 hours, 50 hours. If an officer gets 50 hours, let's say 1 hour per week for a year, or 50 hours in a single week with one of our training courses that we do with so many departments, once an officer has that basic fundamental knowledge, they know enough to protect themselves while also protecting the opponent. Now, obviously, the more you practice, the more muscle memory you develop and more reflexive it becomes, right? And the more you practice, the larger the adversary, the techniques can be applied on, right? The way I look at it is 20 pounds per year. So if I do jiu-jitsu, and this is true for civilians as well. So if you want to train jiu-jitsu and you train for 12 months, your capability to apply the skills that you've developed on someone 20 pounds heavier who doesn't know the same skills, obviously, is viable. If you train for another year, now you got a 40-pound advantage. So if you weigh 160, after 2 years of jiu-jitsu, you weigh 200 pounds, if you know what I'm saying, in terms of your physical potential to overcome a threat. So I think they love how little training is necessary for such massive improvement and such a massive advantage to keep themselves safe and to keep the civilians safe in that interaction.
100%. I mean, it's really like a superpower. It's kind of funny because Park's whole business model is he's the business of story. And really, from a storytelling standpoint, he looks at storytelling as the jiu-jitsu of the business world, where everyone else might be looking at their charts and graphs and whatever. It's like, he says, let's give them a story that allows them to visualize the world through this person's lives. let's allow them to feel emotional about it. And you, Rener, are such a great example of that, telling the story about UFC 1. And it just really helps people say, okay, I'm starting to piece together the picture of what jiu-jitsu is and what it can mean. With regards to, you mentioned it now a couple of times, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. Mark Zuckerberg's a little bit of a smaller dude, white belt in jiu-jitsu, has a little bit of competition training. Do you have any insights into how you think that's going to go down, if it's going to go down? What are your predictions?
I will not share my prediction with the Musk Zuckerberg situation. Let me just say this. I hope jiu-jitsu prevails, right? For the betterment of all of us and for the betterment and for the growth of jiu-jitsu. So that's my vote. Technically, why one thing would happen one way or the other, I'm not going to share today. Maybe a different day, but for today, we're going to stick to jiu-jitsu. We're going to stick to the book, you guys.
The book. Let's talk about the book, Rener. It was really interesting when I got the book and I started reading through it. And again, not being a practitioner, but, watching it, Parker's showed me a lot about jiu-jitsu and whatever. But the fact where you guys went and started digging through, you and your brother did, and started looking at all these techniques that you knew intuitively, but you even had to go in and kind of break them down. And in each case of the 32 principles, each one is its own little story. And then how do you enact that story in your life? Not necessarily on the mat or taking down a thug or in a fight, but how you apply this to your overall life. How did you come about the book? And were you surprised at some of the principles that you came up with?
Sure. So this brings me to, I mentioned two of the things the world loves about jiu-jitsu, right? Number one, it works. Number two, it's nonviolent. I think the third thing that people fall in love with, and maybe Parker can speak to this as well, is like you start practicing these physical techniques. And every time you come to class, you learn a new solution to an old problem, right? You learn a solution to like how to escape of a headlock, how to escape a strangle, how to escape an armbar, how to escape a mount, how to get someone off balance and get on top of the fight. So you're basically presented with a problem and then you learn a solution, right? And sometimes the solution is like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? It's so simple that you wish you could have thought of it. But then eventually over time, your brain and your body start to become rewired so that when you see a solution 12 months from, you see a problem 12 months from now, the way you interpret that problem is completely different. The lens through which you look at that problem is completely different based on the experience you have in jiu-jitsu and how every single problem, every single day that you've solved has shaped the person you've become. And essentially, jiu-jitsu students start to recognize, even without a book, they start to recognize over 1, 2, 3, 5 years of practice, how their practice of the art is changing their operating system in terms of who they are as a human being, not just in combat, but in their everyday lives, right? And I've had countless stories over the last 20 years that I've been a professional jiu-jitsu instructor, countless stories from every student that I sit down and talk to for any number of minutes where they say, yeah, Rener, since I've been doing jiu-jitsu, when I go home, I'm like this with my kids. I'm more patient with my kids. I'm more compassionate with my wife. I'm a better speaker with my employees at my office. I'm a better strategizer with my colleagues at work. So everyone changes how they act and how they interact once jiu-jitsu is part of their operating system. So what I realized is that historically, someone had to practice jiu-jitsu for any number of years to get the benefit of having that jiu-jitsu-based operating system. So for me, it was, is it possible for me to give a reader of a book that same operating system without ever having to step foot on the mat? So essentially, all of us are only as good as our operating system. This computer that I'm doing the Zoom on is only as good as its operating system, the system that is inherent in the computer that allows it to achieve the goals that I want it to achieve or overcome the challenges that the computer is having. This is true for a human being as well. What is our operating system? And everyone's operating system is a function of their education, of their upbringing, of their parenting, of their household. All of that shapes the operating system for the person. And for me, the 32 principles of jiu-jitsu, and what that means is the 32 principles that govern thousands of techniques, right? Jiu-jitsu has never-ending number of techniques. I've learned thousands. I don't even know them all because they're being invented every day all over the world by everyone who makes a life participating in this art. But the point is, even if there's a technique that I haven't learned, if you show it to me, I can tell you what the governing principles are of that particular technique. And those principles fall within the 32. The best analogy is the 32 principles that we've identified essentially are the alphabet for jiu-jitsu. All the words and all the sentences are utilized and created rather utilizing the same 26-letter alphabet, in this case, 32 principles. So I was like, man, how cool would it be if I could find a way to communicate jiu-jitsu's 32 principles, which are being practiced every day by millions of practitioners around the world, but billions and billions and billions have never even ventured onto the mat, but have heard about it. They've read about it. They've seen it in a movie or on a podcast, and they might be fascinated with the idea of jiu-jitsu, but for any number of reasons, they may not feel eligible to learn it. They're too old. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to try something new. So there's any number of reasons why we don't venture onto the mat and learn the physical art. But that doesn't mean someone should be precluded from learning the principles and therefore adopting the same operating system that I benefited from after so many years on the mat. So what this book is my attempt to communicate what those 32 principles are with very detailed written descriptions of the principles and their application in a combat application. But I knew that a written description of a combat application for a physical principle would only get us so far. So I did something that, as far as my knowledge, I don't think has ever been done before in terms of print literature or books, in terms of a self-help book. I added a QR code to every single chapter on the first page. So the reader could scan a QR code and on their phone watch a 3 to 5 minute video in which my brother and I visually and verbally demonstrate on video the combat application of the featured principle. And then once they're done with that video, they close the phone, they open the book, and they re-engage. And now they learn the life and business application of the principle that they just watched and learned on video. So there's an absolute visual representation of what it means. And that's the reason why jiu-jitsu has only ever permeated audiences that step onto the mat, because they're the ones who get those visual and that physical exposure to the principle. So I thought if I can give them that visual, physical, and audio exposure, and then segue into the featured principle in the book and communicate how that featured principle applies to life, business, and relationships using personal stories of the last 30 years of my life and every single significant milestone and how that featured principle played into that significant milestone. I believe, and again, the book hasn't been released yet, but you've seen it. And my goal is that people who have fallen in love with visually and maybe just heard about it or watched jiu-jitsu or listen to Joe Rogan or Jocko and go, man, that's awesome. I want to one day explore that. My hope is that not only do they explore jiu-jitsu's potential in this book, but they adopt the same operating system that I've benefited from so immensely over the last 30 years, personally and professionally. And I never went to college, never earned a degree. But now I am here running several multi-million-dollar businesses in jiu-jitsu and outside of jiu-jitsu. And I attribute 100% of that to the operating system that I was so privileged to have been given through a lifelong practice of jiu-jitsu.
I love it. I can really speak to it from both angles, because as I read the book, The 32 Principles, it was like walking down a trip down memory lane through training and discovering them. But you've put them together so elegantly, and it was just such a beautiful reminder. But that's the addiction that is jiu-jitsu, is that your brain is constantly uncovering these things and implementing them and merging them together and saying, aha, the Kazushi worked because this guy was off balance. I had this addiction and I was doing it for years. I was competing. I'm telling Park about it. I'm trying to get him involved. And I show him this like wicked flying armbar I threw in competition. I'm like, 11 seconds, Dad, submission, check that out. And he's like, well, but what is it? You know? And he's like, I don't get it. I don't get what's happening. I'm like, well, if he doesn't tap, I'm going to break his arm right there. But he reads your book and he goes, I get it now, Parker. I see why this is so engrossing. I see how it's more than just the physicality of it. It's the mentality. It's the spirituality, I would even say. The decision to come to the mat every day, to show up, to give it your best, to train with people, to be in the state of total vulnerability, and to have to trust those people with their arms around your neck. They're not going to, put out your lights. It's really profound. I'm curious. Park read the book. He loved it too. He asked you earlier, he's like, I'm 62 years old. I don't know where to go with it. What would the next steps for him be?
Well, great question. And it just, Park, you having read the book and then kind of being at least finishing the book and being inquisitive about like, man, could I do this? Like, I love that it was good enough. The book was good enough for you to say, man, I understand it. I get the concepts. I understand how this can apply to life and business. And I want to now potentially venture into jiu-jitsu. And the answer is absolutely 100% yes. And just as a framework, my grandfather practiced until 95 years old. So there isn't like there's this hard deadline. In fact, the best line that I think of when we talk about older students or people with previous injuries is a very common thing. I hurt my knee in a car accident. Can I still do jiu-jitsu? Or I broke an elbow doing Muay Thai kickboxing. I chipped my elbow and I can't strike anymore, but can I still do jiu-jitsu? Jiu-jitsu is the art that people retire into from either previous injuries or other martial arts. That's how amazing it is. And that's because it's low impact. Now, I must kind of preface and kind of disclaimer all of that by saying that teacher, instructor matters. Who you learn from and in what training environment matters, because there are some schools where injuries are rampant and it's so competitive and it's so aggressive, the training, that you won't leave any training day without something hurting. But there are other schools where you can go to the school and you're going to learn basic techniques laid out in a clearly defined curriculum in a safe training environment where the students are working together instead of opposing one another, especially at the beginner level. And if you find a school where that's possible, then 100% yes. So my advice to any listener out there who either after this podcast is excited to go give it a shot and give it a look, and if you're not excited after the podcast, read the book. After you read the book, I believe you'll be excited about giving jiu-jitsu a try because you'll be so fascinated by what the book can do personally and professionally that I think the natural next step is to give it a try. But my advice would be to go to a school and go watch a class, watch a beginner class. And if what you watch, you say to yourself, oh my gosh, this is fascinating and it's beautiful. And I could totally envision myself being on the mat right now. And I wish I would have put my uniform on and gave it a shot. If that's the feeling you have after watching one class, then go try the second class. If you watch a class and all you're saying to yourself is, I don't understand anything they're doing right now, contextually, I don't understand what the value is of the skills that they're practicing. And I also certainly don't envision myself doing that right there because I would get injured doing that exact same thing. I'd be in deep pain. And if that's the case, don't do that. But again, if that dismissal takes place, don't dismiss all of jiu-jitsu. Just dismiss that school and then go to another school and give them a shot because it's a completely unregulated industry. So every school is to its own. We have 250 schools of which I've personally certified with my brother, the instructors. So I know how they run their business model and how safe the training is. But I can't vouch for a school that isn't one of ours. So go to our website, gracieuniversity.com, look for a school in your neighborhood. And what's really cool is if you can't find a school, the entire curriculum at our schools is also available online. So we have many students who start training at home with a brother, a father, a son, a husband, a wife. They train together in the living room or the garage or in a bedroom, put a little mat on the floor or some carpet, and they start learning the basics from home. The curriculum is designed for 100% at-home learning for those who can't find a school that is either nearby or is suitable for their type of learning and the safety concerns that they have about practicing the art.
Yeah. All right, Rener, let's jump into your book because I'm sure now some of my listeners are like, dude, okay, what's this have to do with business storytelling in this? Parker said early on, I've always thought that storytelling is the absolute jiu-jitsu practice of business communications. And I say that because so often in business communications, it's a zero-sum game. I'm going to come in, I'm going to kick your ass, I'm going to run you over with a bunch of stats and facts and charts and graphs. And there's a lot of not caring about actually winning over and connecting with that audience. I mean, there is, but most people don't take the time to do it. So when I was going through your 32 principles, I just kept applying them not only to business and life like you did, but I'm like, okay, how do they actually apply in the business storytelling world? So let's do a little test here. I want you at random to pull out one of your principles and explain it to the audience as to how it manifests itself on the mat and how it shows up in our life. And then I'm going to pile on and say, and here's how I see it happen in business communication. Fair enough?
Love it.
Grab one, anyone you like.
Let's go. Sure. Let's go for the clock principle, right? The right move at the wrong time is the wrong move. It's one of the most important principles in jiu-jitsu because this idea is you could have the perfect armbar planned, but if it's from the guard instead of the mount, it may not be effective, right? This right move at the wrong time is the wrong move. So in jiu-jitsu, you learn all these techniques. That's just the first step, learn the move. The next layer of mastery is learning when those apply in the actual fight. Now, in life and business, this also couldn't be more true. In fact, I had a very personal story, and I speak about this in the book, where we had a doctor who was a student of ours, and she said, Henner, I have a patient of mine who suffers from the most severe case of social anxiety I've ever seen in a teenager. He was 16 years old. He vomits profusely in high intense social situations. He can't even get into them. I said, great, I want to meet him. I think I can help him. They show up to the school. They're parked outside front. Mom calls me, the mom of the teenager. His name was Shane. And mom calls me and says, Henner, sorry, we're not going to be able to make it into class today. I said, what do you mean? She said, we're parked outside, but Shane's not coming in. I said, you're outside my building right now? She says, yes. I said, can I come out and say hi? So I go out there in my uniform, my gi, and as I approach the car, I can hear the loudest, most intense crying I've heard in my life from the stomach. Hysterical crying from this teenage boy in the backseat of the car. So I asked the mom who was standing outside the car, I said, can I go in and can I go inside? I didn't know what I was going to do. I just said, I'm going to invite myself into the car and see what happens, right? To me, this is a jiu-jitsu situation, completely unknown territory. I've never experienced this before, but I know that if I put myself in the situation, that jiu-jitsu will set me free. I don't know what's going to happen. So I get in the car, I sit next to him, and he's doubled over doing this like back and forth crying for the next 20 to 30 minutes. I don't say anything throughout this process. I just sit there. Finally, he runs out of steam. He starts breathing more normally, sits up. And I look at him and I say, hey, Shane, I'm Henner. What do you like to do for fun? Video games. I said, what games? And for 15 minutes, we proceed to talk about video games and whatever he does and goes on. Finally, once he's talking to me normally and I feel like we're good to go, I say, Shane, here's the deal. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate you being here. I would love to give you a tour of my facility. Will you walk around the building with me and just check it out? I know he wouldn't go in if I said, let's go do jiu-jitsu. There's no way he's going in. I said, let me show you a tour. It's beautiful. They have a museum inside. So I walk him in, I tour the museum, all these family artifacts. I walk around the locker room. I go towards the big mat. And then I walk him by a private room where we have one-on-one training sessions. I open the door. I walk in. I step on the mat and I said, Shane, you won't believe how soft these mats are in here. Come on in. Take your shoes off. Come in and feel how soft the mats are. He walks in. His mom walks in. I shut the door. I say, perfect. Shane, why don't you lay down on the floor right here in the middle? And I'm going to show you one technique. I get on top of him. His mom's sitting in the corner. I mount on him. He says, okay. He lays down. I show him one mount escape. He couldn't escape from underneath me. And then I show him the escape. He lights up with a smile. He does it on me. He's successful. I show him 5 or 6 techniques over the next hour. We're doing jiu-jitsu. His mom is in the corner. Tears are dropping down her eyes. I look over. She says nothing. She's crying. I'm having the best time with this kid. We're like new pals now, having a great time. Finish the class. Great. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Okay, great. Bye, Henner. Next Tuesday, it only takes 15 minutes for him to get out of the car the next time. The next time it's less than 10 minutes. And the third time he walks straight in the building each time. One time he walked straight in, short period, threw up in the bathroom, came out and went straight to class. Like he's dealing with it. All by way of saying he eventually joined group classes, no more privates. He went to group learning environment. He earned his blue belt. He ended up going from high school when I met him. He went to college, left his family, and now he's at college having a great time. So in this story, it's all by way of saying the right move was jiu-jitsu. The wrong time was when he's crying hysterically in the car. So for me to go in there and use the depletion principle and sit patiently until he had nothing left. And at that point, he sits up. So if you don't believe in the depletion principle and you don't believe in the clock principle, I promise you, I would have said, okay, sorry, mom, you can take him home because if he doesn't want to do it, then I can't force him. Take it easy, bye. And because of that, his life changed forever, all because of the 32 principles applied not to jiu-jitsu, but to getting someone out of the car and on the mat for jiu-jitsu, perfectly timed when I had him take off his shoes and feel how soft the mats were. I got him.
And Henner, you were able to apply that because you were thinking you're just so trained in knowing the circumstance and that clock principle of when is the right time to throw the move. And so you did the depletion principle, and that's true in business storytelling as well. So I sent you, and you saw that, my 32 principles of storytelling in jiu-jitsu. The clock principle, all stories are temporal, right? They have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have an end. That's why the clock principle is at the heart of all communication. Your boss just gave you 5 minutes to state your case. Your prospect opened up 20 minutes for a Zoom meeting to pitch your wares. The local business club has asked for a 1-hour keynote to inspire its young executives. How deftly you use short, medium, and long stories to leverage the synergies of the other principles, including pyramid principle, connection, velocity, and acceptance, that transport your audience from their world into yours. So it's the exact same thing. If you were on stage, or if you were trying to coach a team inside your organization, or you've got one troubled person inside that company, you have to be thinking about what is happening in their world, what journey are they on, and what stories am I going to share with them to get the connection, all at the right time, though.
I love that, dude. That's great. So I took jiu-jitsu and applied it to life. And now you're applying life jitsu and applying it to business storytelling. What does this tell us? These principles, they're all universal. And that's what I love about it, right? I love that I could practice this art my whole life. And the irony is we didn't name the principles. We didn't identify. And Parker knows this as someone who's been in jiu-jitsu for a long time. We didn't name, classify, categorize, and identify these 32 kind of core principles of jiu-jitsu until just a couple years ago. So even though they always existed, right? Gravity always existed. It wasn't until Isaac Newton showed up that it had a name and it was kind of understood in that sense. So that's the same idea with these principles. We didn't invent them. We simply put them on the wall, labeled them for what they are. But it's amazing how once you label something, once you name it, once you classify it, it's so much easier to recognize in other aspects of your life. And that's why we're so excited to have extrapolated these from a jiu-jitsu perspective. But then once I did that, and this, like I said, was a couple of years ago during COVID, actually, when we found and identified what those 32 principles were. Once I did that, all I kept thinking was, wow, these aren't just the jiu-jitsu principles. Every single one of these I can tie to different instances in my life where they set me free, where they were the key to my success in overcoming an obstacle, be it a relationship challenge, a life, or a business challenge. I can pin each one of these to major life events. And that's what the book really chronicles. Every single chapter, there's a major life milestone. And some of them are as simple as stories of me dealing with a bully in high school, right? The isolation principle was one. There was a kid in high school who would always punk. He's kind of a punk to everybody else, never directly to me, but he made his reputation of being somewhat of a badass, right? His name was Nick. And Nick Portune is what the guy's name. So this guy, Nick, always punking everybody else. And then he comes to his friends and he's saying that I would beat Henner up, no problem. And I'm like, and I heard this through the grapevine. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this guy's freaking nuts. Like, what is he thinking? Who is he saying this to? And I thought to myself, I'm not going to let him build himself by trying to spread rumors about his abilities over mine. That's not how he's going to build his empire over here. So isolation principle applied. Instead of talking to Nick when his peers were around, where he might feel the need to puff up in their presence, right? As some people often will because of the social pressure around other people. So taking out that social factor, I caught Nick at the back gates right near where my house was. I used to always leave through the back because I lived only a block from the school. And I just happened to see him by himself. And I'm like, oh, perfect. So I walk up on him and I say, Nick, how are you, bro? Everything good? Yeah, good. Hey, listen, man, I've been hearing that you were saying that you could beat me up. Is there something true to this? Oh, man, no, Henry, no, man. No, there's no way, bro. There's no way I was saying stuff like that. I would never. I said, because if you ever wanted to test it out, I'd be glad to. No, there's no need for that, man. We're good. There's no need for that, man. Done. So and it was just me and him. And I was perfect because I don't really want to fight someone for no reason. And if I didn't have to, and I know he doesn't want to fight me. Right? Which is why he's not saying it to my face. He's saying it to everyone else. So in this case, the isolation principle applied at the right time allowed me to avert and avoid a potential physical fight, which has potential unintended consequences. I don't know what those are potentially, right? I don't want to fight. I'm a lover, not a fighter. That's why I learned jiu-jitsu. So, but the perfect application of the isolation principle, which in jiu-jitsu, it's everything. Every time we go for a submission park, we're always thinking about isolating a limb away from center mass so that we can exploit that limb, hyperextend, so much isolation when you take the limb away from the rest of your body. And in this case, I took Nick away from his support system and from the peers that would have encouraged him to potentially puff up in that situation. We're good to go. Your turn. Isolation principle and storytelling.
All right. It is when you are having an argument, you're trying to bring two worlds together, And you want to isolate your point down to a single point, because typically your opponent or your debater is coming at you with lots of information. And the only way you're going to beat them is to find the singular narrative. We use the and, but, therefore to do it. Set up problem resolution dynamic. And that way you now take over control of all those listening in, even your opponent, because our limbic brain, problem solution, cause and effect, decision-making brain loves a singular, isolated narrative, not a bunch of information coming at you.
Is it fair to say, like, sometimes I'll use the term linchpin of their argument, right? Is that the linchpin is the main thing that everything rests on once you identify that and you would target that specifically?
Absolutely. And if they've done a good job of isolating you, then the only way you're going to overcome that is to get even more razor focused with your argument. One problem, one solution at a time.
Love that. Okay, next one, distance principle. So in jiu-jitsu, and again, when you scan the QR code at the beginning of the distance principle chapter, a video will pop up. I can't emphasize this enough. It's such an exciting part of the book for me because I do keynotes, leadership jiu-jitsu, entrepreneurial jiu-jitsu presentations all over the world, Fortune 500 companies, and I get to present visually. And it was my biggest fear in writing this book is like, man, what if we write a book and it's text on paper, but they don't get that same visual experience that all of these audience members are so happy to get when I do these visual presentations. And sometimes I have them out of their chairs and they're actually grabbing each other, and I'm having them actually I did Procter & Gamble a month or two ago, and I was at Procter & Gamble headquarters teaching a group of like 50 executives, newly promoted leaders, and I had all of them on top of each other doing techniques. So not only were they learning the principles of jiu-jitsu applied to leadership and business, they were actually bonding with each other. So that's a little plug there for the Rener Gracie interactive keynotes. But the point is, what readers will get when they scan the QR code is a beautiful video that articulates the distance principle. Now, what does this one mean? In a fight, whoever manages the distance manages the damage that can be done. So what the traditional martial arts in America and around the world is, we stand in front of each other. I throw a punch, you throw a punch. I throw a kick, you throw a kick. And we keep striking from a striking distance. And whoever's faster and more powerful will win. That's not a very efficient way to fight because it's so easy for someone to land a wild punch and you get knocked out, right? Like an accidental knockout happens all the time, potentially. So instead, in jiu-jitsu, what we aim to do, instead of standing at that dangerous striking range, we want to be all the way out where they can't reach us and we can't reach them. So we're safely out of range. We call this the green zone. Or you want to be all the way in where we're in a clinched distance, standing or on the ground, whether we're on top or whether we're on the bottom. Their strikes are too close to be effective. A strike needs a perfect distance to land, which is why any karate master who gets taken down by a jiu-jitsu master is a fish literally out of water because they don't have the balance, the distance, and the power from that grappling range to be effective. So what I try to teach my jiu-jitsu students is always manage that distance, whether you're on the standing fight or on a ground fight. Now in life, oh, by the way, green zone, look, this we'll call the red zone, where I can punch you, but you can also punch me. You don't want to exist in the red zone. Now, in life and business, how does this apply? There's the same exact thing with every relationship in your life. There are green zones, which are safe zones to operate in with your colleagues, your leadership, your employees, right? No matter what it is, there's a safe zone, which is you can either be so intimately connected and so close in your relationship to them that you can almost predict their next movement, that you know exactly, they're predictably predictable, right? They're safely predictable because you know them so well and you're so close in range with them. And there's also another green zone, which is you're completely out of the sphere of interaction with them, and you're safely out far enough where if they mess up, it doesn't have a direct impact on you. Where most people go wrong in managing relationships is they exist in the red zone, where they're not close enough to be able to supervise, monitor, and maintain a healthy relationship with that person, but they're not far enough to be out of range when damage happens or a poor decision is made by this person. So you suffer the consequences of their poor decision because you aren't effectively managing that distance, right? You want to be all the way out or all the way in, and existing in that somewhat emotional red zone, right? That psychological, that relational red zone can be very dangerous. And in the book, I talk about two examples where unfortunately, I had relationships with people with whom I've trusted quite implicitly, but our relationships were in the red zone. They were not intimately close. I wasn't with them because they lived quite far away, so I was not very close to them. And I also wasn't far enough away because when they made some very poor decisions that ultimately had some sexual assault accusations surrounding them, I was in the blast radius of that poor behavior and poor decision-making, even though I wasn't, and I just regret not having been close enough to have been managed that situation prior to it becoming a much larger situation. So I talk about that. And once again, it's a situation where I was in the blast zone. So I was not close enough to manage the damage, and I was not far enough to be immune to it. I was right there in the damage zone. And, I learned my lesson from that one. I'll say it very, very clearly on the distance principle applied to relationships.
Well, the distance principle in storytelling is almost always about bringing your audience in closer. And so I wrote, and I sent over to you, in jiu-jitsu, just as you had said, whoever controls the distance controls the damage to be done. In business storytelling, the storyteller seeks to control the distance between them and their audience, especially adversarial audiences whom you want to win over. A connection story that demonstrates your shared beliefs and values is a powerful way to reel them in closer to you, which of course triggers then the connection principle.
Love that. Oh my gosh, dude, this is crazy. Okay, another one. So
Parker, let's throw one over to Parker. Of the ones you saw Rener have, what was one of the principles that struck you?
Well, the one that I'm most interested is in the Kazushi principle. When I started doing jiu-jitsu, I came from like a football and rugby background, and that's all I had. I didn't know any technique, didn't know anything, but I knew how to make people off balance. I'm curious how that principle works with adversaries or people you're trying to win over. How do you use that one?
Great question. So, and just so everyone knows, the Kazushi principle, the term Kazushi means essentially translates to breaking someone's balance, right? And it's a huge principle from judo and now jiu-jitsu, and every time I'm on the bottom and I'm trying to reverse my fortunes and get on top of someone, I need to break their balance. When I talk about the life and business application of the Kazushi principle in the book, my kind of life definition for that same principle is seeking first to understand, then to be understood, right? So essentially, it's the idea of I can't break someone's balance if I don't first understand what are the balance points they are relying on and resting on. So when I think of Kazushi applied to life and business, I think in any given situation, if I'm trying to win someone over, right, for the analogous comparison to reversing someone, right, and kind of getting on top, if I'm trying to win them over to my way of thinking, I need to understand where they're at first and then recruit them to my side through compassion and through, profound and meaningful understanding and communication. So in this case, I had a situation where we have a very large school here. We have about 250 certified training centers around the world, headquartered here in Torrance, California, where we have about 2,000 students. So it's a massive operation for a martial arts school. I teach several classes a week, but we have about a dozen other instructors who teach when I'm not there and teach all these other classes. So we have a great team. So in a class one day that I wasn't teaching, we have one of our great other instructors that was leading it. A mom shows up with her daughter, and the daughter was, I think, 5 years old at the time. And the mom shows up, and her daughter does the class. And basically, after the class is over and a day passes, we get a review on Yelp, scathing 1-star Yelp review, like vicious, like it's hard to read, like for me, like a horror movie. That this happened on my watch. And what she said was, my daughter was there, nobody noticed her, and she got paired up with another girl that was aggressive with her, another young girl who was too aggressive with her with the techniques, and my daughter helpless in her eyes. And I wanted to just go out there and grab her and pull her off my daughter, and there was no teacher helping in this moment. And it was just like a crazy situation. And I share this comfortably now because we have resolved all of these issues. And basically, after Myra was the mom's name, is Miranda was the daughter's name. So after this happened, basically we just changed our way of doing business. But more importantly, as soon as it happened, I thought to myself, holy cow, I could be offended by this and say, hey, she doesn't deserve our school for talking so much trash. Or I can apply the Kazushi principle, which in this case was, I need to know who she is. So I had my student services representatives. I said, hey, give me the phone number. And they said, Henry, the Yelp doesn't have a last name. So we don't even know who this is. I said, look through the parent contact information, figure it out. Someone tried a class yesterday and I need to know the number today. So do whatever cross-referencing needs to be done to find that number. They found it, right? Myra. So I got the mom's number. I called her. I said, hey, it's Henner. Hey, what's going on? I said, yeah, I heard you had a bad experience yesterday. And I want to understand exactly what happened directly from you. so that we can take steps to make sure no one ever experiences that ever again. Oh, well, immediately disarmed. Immediately the tone changed. Well, I mean, I think you guys do a great job there. And I just, I've heard so many good things, and I've always wanted to train there myself. And I just was so happy to bring my daughter now that she's finally 5 years old. And so, I just went there, and soft and respectful tone. She tells me the whole story and gives me great detail. And I say after all of that, I say, Myra, you have no idea how grateful I am for you to have had that experience and then shared it. Many people haven't been able to experience and don't say a word. But for every one person who speaks up, 21 people felt the same thing but never said anything. So for you to have spoken up, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. In fact, I'm so grateful for you having done that I want to offer you and your daughter, Miranda, a private class with myself so that I can give Miranda the introduction to jiu-jitsu that she deserves and never got. Oh my God, that would be amazing. And can I join the class too? I always wanted to try, but I never got around to it until I said, yes, I'm going to teach you and I'm going to teach Miranda. And I'm going to bring one of our top instructors. Bobby is a female instructor, to be in the room with me. We're going to have a great time. We went and did the class with Bobby and me and absolute loved it. Of course, it's one-on-one. How could she not? We're like having a circus of a time in there. And then at the end, I said, here's the deal, Myra and Miranda. I said, how'd you guys like it? Oh my God, that was amazing. We'd love it. I said, cool. I want to pay for the private classes for you for the next month. I'll cover the private class cost with Bobby. She's going to teach you for the next month. And then after that, if you want to continue, we'll get you back in the group classes. And I want you to know that because of your experience, we've changed how we deal with new students in group classes so that every first-time student who enters the building is identified as soon as they step on the mat, and they're given the best partner in the room so that they have the best imaginable experience until they get their training wheels off and they feel more comfortable to be able to handle themselves in a slightly higher level of intensity, if that's what it needs to be. I said, so everything changed because of your feedback, and I'm just so happy to have you guys back on the mat. She went back the next day. The 1-star Yelp review was gone. It was a 4 or 5 star, whatever the max stars are, and raving review. And we're best friends. She continued to train. She recently took some time off. She had another baby, and everything is great. And she's happy to share that story in the book. This was the Kazushi principle applied to life and business. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. But in order to do that, you have to care enough to say, man, I'm willing to face the fact that I need this feedback, right? Because I could have, again, shunned it off. I didn't. Instead, jiu-jitsu prevailed. And I got my ego out of the way, which, by the way, was a sacrifice principle in that moment, to sacrifice my pride and my ego to be able to call her, thank her, and then be willing to listen to all of it. Open ears. Everything you have for me right now, give it to me. And then we became better as a result. Jiu-jitsu is life.
And you just gave a great demonstration of the Kazushi principle in business communications. It's the one principle that helps you overcome an anti-story. And the only way to overcome an anti-story is do exactly what you're talking about there. Listen, first understand, so then you could be more, understood in the process. But you can't beat that story with data, charts, and graphs. If you came back and said, yeah, but there were so many kids in that, there were 30 kids, it's hard, sometimes that's going to happen, it just doesn't work. You threw her off balance and brought her in all the best ways. She wasn't expecting that, I guarantee you. And you overcame that anti-story and then delivered on the promises you made in your own story. That is so critical as well.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And again, looking back on these moments, and I'm like, holy cow, I never learned this in school. Like I said, I didn't get a college degree. I've had no formal training in communication, no formal business of story, degree, no formal, nothing, just jiu-jitsu, right? Is like just the wind in my sails is jiu-jitsu. That's all I have to power this, all the success that I've achieved and all the obstacles that I've overcome. And it's not limited just entrepreneurial success. It really is relationships. It really is timing. It really is leverage. It really is efficiency. But these 32 micro principles that are essentially the basis for everything that it works so beautifully in jiu-jitsu, it's all that I've called upon. And it was just, writing the book was so therapeutic in that sense, because I had been using jiu-jitsu principles all along as my operating system. I really didn't know it then. It's only now as I'm writing a book and I look back and I'm like, no way, dude. High school, 2001, 1999, and I'm applying, the posture principle against my teacher to convince her why she should change my grade from a B to an A, very much against her will. right? And I'm like, this is crazy looking back and now seeing all these connections. So I'll give you guys one more, the river principle. So I'm at a park, December 27th, 2016. I'm at the park with my son, and I'm wearing my hoodie around I'm wearing my favorite hoodie that morning. It was a chilly evening before and it had rained. So there was a little bit dew on the grass, but the sun start coming through and the clouds clear, and I'm starting to sweat wearing my favorite hoodie, and the hoodie comes off because I'm like, yo, I don't need this hoodie anymore. In that instant, I took my hoodie and I was preparing to tie it around my waist, right? Like I was about to do the fanny pack where you tie it around. So I was coming around, like getting ready to do this one. And right as my hands came together, as they approached, it's almost like opposite magnetic forces where they don't let them touch. My hands simply couldn't come together. And I looked down and I'm like, no, I'm a cool dad. And then I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So I took the hoodie, I threw it over my shoulder, like the loose one, like this wannabe cool guy, like it's better, right? And I bend over to pick him up. But when I do, the hoodie slips off my shoulder and fell onto the wet grass. In that moment, I pick it up and I was so frustrated. All I thought to myself was, this is ridiculous. There is no efficient way to carry an unworn sweatshirt that is both functional and fashionable, right? And fashionably acceptable. Because it falling off my shoulder certainly wasn't functional, right? I'm having to carry my kid, a big disaster. So I leave the park frustrated initially. And as I'm driving home with my son and my hoodie and my family now, in-laws were there, I go home. My frustration started turning into fascination on the way home. And I think to myself, there's got to be a way to jiu-jitsu the hoodie, right? I'm thinking to myself. So I get home, I lock myself in my office, right? This is December 27th, 2 days after Christmas. So all the in-laws are at the house kind of making a mess, and there's no work this week, right? Technically, there's not supposed to be. So I sneak away. I have shoestrings, paper clips, duct tape, scissors, and the hoodie that I was wearing at the park. Disappear. 30 minutes later, I come out of the office with a functioning prototype. Check this out. You hold the sweatshirt upside down, and inside goes your favorite sweatshirt. Turn it over, and outside comes a fully functional backpack that can be worn as a backpack. You can put other things inside the backpack. And then I was like, well, it kind of sits too low and too loose. I thought to myself, I don't want that. I want it to be a little more like, you know how you have those drawstring backpacks? They always tend to be a little too long. So people end up tying knots in the ropes so that it kind of fits more. But that doesn't work because then when I put it back in hoodie form, I got knots in my hoodie. So instead, I invented the world's flattest cord lock. Look at this little Christmas tree lock that grabs the string. So now you take this, you slide this up to any height, and it permanently stays there until I can do both sides. Look, it's called slide and bite technology. And now the backpack sits much higher and doesn't bounce around. If I'm running or biking or hiking or doing jujitsu, that's not going to go anywhere. That's not going to bounce around. And look at this, until I just grab the tip right here and I pop that down, one pop, it ungrabs, right? That compression lock comes off. And now I'm back to here. And then I reach back around and I simply open this up, right? The strings recede. And then I go back inside. Count to 3, please, Parker. Too slow, bro. We're already back to the hoodie.
Too good.
You got him. So you guys, look at how crazy. Normally, I don't take people under the hood, pun intended. But look, I'm going to take you guys in. So on the outside, you see nothing. On the inside, all it is at the hem, at the waist, there's a little pouch. And inside the pouch lives your strings. So that's inside the construction on the inside of the garment. So you have your outside, it's just sewn in, it's inside here. So all you do is you literally reach in, one grab, one pull, and that turns into a backpack when you don't need your hoodie anymore. And what I'll do is I'll go to the park and I'll put my son's hoodie inside here. And then if it's a hot day, we got a backpack. If it's cold, I pull out his hoodie, I reach in, pull out my hoodie, and now we have no more backpack to carry around. So you guys, I invented this company. It's called Quick Flip. I put a video on Facebook. Shark Tank calls out to me and says, yo, we saw it. We want to do this. So I go on Shark Tank, jiu-jitsu on the stage, do my conversion, and they're like blown away. And I get a deal with Lori Grenier on TV. And we never actually signed the deal after the fact, but we got a big success on TV. We sold a ton of hoodies. And then after going on Shark Tank, all these corporations started reaching out. Google, Intel, Amazon, Warner Brothers ordered like 3,500 hoodies with the Warner Brothers logo on the hoodie. And then when you turn it into a backpack, it's a Warner Brothers backpack. So we started doing wholesale kind of customization custom hoodies for all these large, corporate entities. And then eventually I got the call.
Folks, he's just run off the camera. He's coming back though.
Dramatic call.
There it is.
Look at this, you guys. This is an Avengers hoodie.
All right.
For Disneyland Avengers Campus. And in goes your Avengers hoodie, one snap, and out comes your sublimated Avengers backpack, you guys. Check that out. So Avengers, cool. So listen up. When we get in trouble, we call the Avengers. When the Avengers get in trouble, they call Quick Flip. So this is what's so wild, you guys. And here's the craziest part. I'm not an apparel guy. I don't do apparel, right? I've never invented a garment in my life until I invented Quick Flip, because the river principle, instead of getting stuck in the frustration, when a rock appears in a river, the water doesn't bother with the rock. The water flows where the rock is not. And this is what I experienced. I had a frustration moment. Rather than sitting in it and getting stuck head on with the rock, I just asked myself, where is the opportunity in the adversity that I'm experiencing right now? And then that's when I turned my frustration into fascination. I invented a company. Now it's being sold all over the world. And now Disneyland has it on its retail racks in Avengers hoodies, all by accident, essentially, but all because of jiu-jitsu, because I didn't have a choice, you guys. When I experienced a frustration, I didn't even have a choice to say, I'm not going to do anything. No, my jiu-jitsu DNA simply said, we're going to carve out a problem. We're going to figure out a solution. The same way my DNA says, if I'm stuck in an armbar, I don't have a choice. I have to devise a solution in a moment, in an instant, to save myself from the dilemma that I'm currently facing. And this is the beauty. Anytime I land in a situation, in jiu-jitsu now, in a fight, and no matter where I land, you guys, if I land in an unknown, threatening position, what happens is something that I've called a 32 principles diagnostic. In that moment, my body and my mind work together to assess, we're talking a matter of seconds, split seconds. It assesses what principles could be deployed to deal with this unknown threat or situation that I've landed in. It's automatic. It happens like rapid succession. And then let's say 4 principles could be applied. And then my body does a very quick test to see which of those 4 principles would be most efficient. And let's say 2 of those principles can be applied without wasting too much energy. So now we're down to 2. And then maybe the escape is a combination of those 2. Maybe the escape is only one principle, the river principle, or what might need to be applied. And then I create a technique in that moment for that particular threat scenario based on that diagnostic that just ran. So what I realized is that in life, it's the same thing. No matter what roadblock or obstacle I run into, I run a diagnostic, and then automatically the principles that could be applied reveal themselves to me. And then it's my job to then say, okay, which way do I want to take this? But this diagnostic and this ability to have the tools and to have this operating system from anyone, anywhere in the world, by understanding what these principles are, learning them visually and auditorily, and then reading about them and connecting with them in a personal and professional capacity in the stories that I tell, my hope is that it becomes their operating system. So next time they face a frustration, they don't just get stuck in it. Rather, they devise a solution, and in some cases start a business. In other cases, simply make life better for themselves and those around them. That's the life that I've lived. And it's been a crazy ride, you guys. It's been crazy to see how jiu-jitsu has applied to life and business and relationships. And I'm so proud of the book we've completed here. And I can't wait to get feedback from other readers around the world.
Yeah, love it. When is the book coming out and where can people buy it?
August 22nd is when the book comes out. And it's available everywhere books are sold, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com. You name it. So we're very excited to get it out. Working on the audiobook as well. Just finished recording that. So that should be out as well soon at the same time on PubDate. And we're good to go. But you can go to the32principles.com/book. And that will take you to an introductory page where you can watch a video that introduces the entire concept. You could also just scan this QR code right there. I'll hold it still for you guys. Just scan that. It'll take you right to that page. That's kind of like let's begin the journey together.
And Rener, we'll have all the links in the show notes to it. Plus, I'm going to be doing a blog post with my 32 principles inspired by your book on storytelling. So I will have all of the QR code there and the links in there as well.
Love it. And the foreword was done by Jocko Willink, a renowned Navy SEAL, entrepreneur, public speaker, author himself. So Jocko was kind enough to do the forward as a Navy SEAL who had very early exposure to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as a huge fan and an incredible practitioner himself and black belt. So I was really grateful for that, because Jocko is a great embodiment of the jiu-jitsu principles applied to life and business. And I'm glad he had a chance to check it out and say some really nice things about the book in his foreword. So that's also available you can read the entire foreword at that QR code or at the link that I provided or that you'll find in the show notes. So check it out, you guys. It's all good. And I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but you'll learn about it when you read about the velocity principle in the book. Bobblehead. You're flying in commercial airlines, right? And you go to sleep. What happens? Bobblehead. Anytime you fly and you pass out in the plane, your head bobs, and then you wake up in a jolt and it's a miserable flight the whole way there. You never get deep sleep. Well, I've experienced the same thing. Incredible frustration. I came home from one flight 5 years ago. I landed, I ordered airplane seats on eBay, put them in my garage, came up with a solution 5 years ago and patented it. And it's called, pun intended, the sleeper hold. King of travel pillows. And they arrived like in a matter of weeks. The first shipment of 50,000 sleeper hold pillows is coming in from our factory. We did a Kickstarter 2 months ago, Kickstarter. We launched the pillow on Kickstarter. We sold over $1 million, raised over $1 million on this Kickstarter campaign. I think it was like 17,000 backers and 32,000 pillows that we pre-sold based on the number of people out there who are suffering from bobblehead. So once again, what happened? Problem, river principle, solution, new business was born. Velocity principle was applied in the bringing of this to the market. And, you'll learn about that in the book, but it's just, this is it, you guys. I can't control jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu controls me, right? Jiu-jitsu, this operating system literally dictates my every move because I've swam in this water since I was born. And this book is my, very audacious attempt to equip a world of readers with that same operating system without ever having to step foot on the mat. And if I could do that, I think that would be an incredible contribution to the world, up there with the contribution we're having to law enforcement, to bullied children, to sexual assault survivors. I mean, everyone benefits from jiu-jitsu in different ways. And I'm just so excited that this book will be an opportunity for people to experience jiu-jitsu without having to engage in the physicality necessarily, but still fully understand what's happening in the subtleties and in the nuances of these incredible 32 principles. So thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to come on here and share some stories and talk about how jiu-jitsu has shaped my life, and Parker as well for jumping on as a jiu-jitsu practitioner who very much understands this language. I appreciate that perspective. And Park, congrats on all the great success in the business of storytelling. I have been told by many people that I'm at least a decent storyteller. I'd say maybe I'm a blue belt. If you're a black belt, Park, I'm a blue belt storyteller. But I'm very proud of my blue belts, and I'm going to keep working, and I'm going to keep listening to your incredible podcast to keep getting more great ideas.
Well, I would love to get you up to being a black belt business of story practitioner. So we'll take that offline.
We can trade belts. Black belt for black belt. Black belt jiu-jitsu, black belt for storytelling.
You got it. Parker, any last thoughts for Rener?
I would just say, Rener, I so believe in your mission in life, and I so believe that if more people that we can bring into this in whatever form it is, jiu-jitsu is going to help them. It's going to help them with their operating system. And that's really what we all need right now, is an upgrade to the operating system. So thank you for sharing it, man. I'm so happy you're out here doing it. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure, you guys. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll hope to see you guys next time. Thank you.
If you liked what you heard on today's show, please share it with someone who would benefit by using the jiu-jitsu of storytelling to strengthen the persuasiveness and influence of their business communications. If I can help you and your team excel through the stories you tell through virtual, in-person, or hybrid mastery courses, keynotes, and even do-it-yourself storytelling training, then please send me a note to park@businessofstory.com. Darius Holbert composed our theme music, Caden Howell edited our show, and Marissa Hill guides our marketing. So please join us next week as we'll cover Chapter 3 of Brand Bewitchery, called Stakes, How to Connect with the Wishes and Wants of Your Customers. Until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it epic. Thanks for listening.